Okay, so for this section of the lecture, I'm going to be discussing with you guys what it is exactly that a lighter does, or some of the things that a lighter looks for, strives for, in order to create a better image. When you describe to somebody what a light that, or you describe the role of being a lighter on an animated film, people don't necessarily know what that means. You know, they understand what a modeler does. They understand there needs to be props built and characters built for the scene. People understand what animators do. They understand that the characters need to move and talk and walk and all that goes into it. But for a lighter, they assume, there are some assumptions made that it's just a matter of making a scene look like it's daytime or nighttime, or sometimes it's even just turning all the lights in the scene on. And there are some things that a lighter needs to accomplish in order to do their job well that may not necessarily be known. So the three things that I think are the three things that a lighter needs to do in order to create a successful image are: they need to create good visual shaping, they need to create accurate mood, and they need to direct the viewer's eye around the image to the central focal point of the story. So visual shaping. What visual shaping is basically creating good value differences as you go across an image. Because what we're doing here with whether it's a painting or a photograph or a film or whatever, is we are perceiving 3D space in a 2D media. We're faking the audience into thinking that this object, this flat vase that's in the back of this picture we're looking at, is actually round. And we do that by giving it visual shape, by making one side lighter and falling off as we go across, and the opposite side be darker, and it gives it volume, as it gives it weight. If it was the same tonal value across the entire object, across that whole vase, then it would be flat. It would feel like a flat object to the audience, and that's not what we want. And I thought this painting was a good example of just good visual shaping throughout everything. There's the oranges on the right hand side, the olives or capers or whatever those are at the bottom. They have just good round volume to them, and every element, even the background, even there's some vignetting going on, but there's some good fall off, there's some good dark to light value shifting. Nothing is ever getting too flat. That's the first thing that's going to be a dead giveaway to something not being true physical 3D space or real space, is that areas get too flat, and that is truly one of the biggest mistakes that a lighting artist can make. You see this a lot in portrait lighting as well. It's huge when you're lighting for a character. You want there to be good roll off across their face. You want there to be a key side and crossing over to the fill side. You also never want any area to get too dark. You just want to create some volume, some life, some visual interest, and you do that by never allowing the image to get too even. Here's a good example of some background. If you follow the spiral stairs as they go up, there's just every stair is different than the last. It's each it's subtle. It's a ramp of color, of light, of everything around the image to just give it that volume and that life that we need. Again here in film lighting, it's the same thing. You just and again, this is especially true of a character's face. You just always want there to be some sort of value shift throughout, and you want it to make sense to where the key direction is coming from where the main light source is. If any of you watch Mad Men, you know that this show does an excellent job of almost every shot, and it just has really good visual shaping on the characters, and just kind of giving volume and life to everything that we see here. And again, here's a good example of a good environment having good environmental shaping. You see that if you look across the floor and across that wall back behind the two women, there's just constant. It's subtle. You don't necessarily think about it, but there's definitely value change across the entire thing. That nothing ever gets too flat, and it just feels really nice. The second thing, again, is mood. And when you think of mood lighting, you probably think of, or at least I do, of kind of a scary or creepy or high contrast type thing. But that's not always necessarily the case. Of course, that is something a mood that we will look to create in a 3D project. But it's not always this kind of high intensity, deep contrast. You can go from this to something like this. Like setting mood could also mean lighting something to be very cute and very soft, and it could be a romantic scene or a very happy scene where you're getting this kind of nice bright rim light, and you're kind of giving everything an effect like there's a little wipe of Vaseline on the lenses, how they used to do it, to kind of get everything just kind of soft and the colors kind of meld together, and all that stuff. So it's just setting the proper mood for the emotions of the scene and the emotions of what's going on. This is from 12 Angry Men, which is a very uh, dynamic film. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's constantly filled with these monologues where people are giving very impassioned speeches, and throughout it, there's just really great dynamic lighting during the whole film. Something else that I like to look to when I used to, or I guess still when I look at reference, is to look to silent films. I know you're not going to get a lot of color reference out of it, but you're going to get some really good moodiness because they hit it over the top with it. They really went over the top with their moods because you couldn't rely on dialogue in those films to kind of get an idea of what's happening all the time. Sometimes you need the visual cues, so you can see kind of a variation between this like heavy, dark, contrasty, underlit, evil structure from Metropolis to, and I always loved the very soft lit starlets. They would always cut between, you'd get this guy, and then immediately the next cut would be this soft. It's like the damsel in distress was always kind of nice. So I would recommend looking at some silent films to get some idea of the way that they would, kind of set the different moods on things. So the third thing that you want to always do is direct the viewer's eye. So you want to tell the viewer where to look with light. You want to, because naturally the viewer is going to look to. There are a couple of visual cues that will you can kind of play off because people by default will look to normally the brightest part of the image or the most contrasty part of the image or the most saturated part of the image. And those three things will allow the viewer to know that in this particular image we're looking at now, the frame in the middle is the one that we're supposed to be looking at and not the two on the side, not the paper on the table. That for some reason, whatever the motivation was, that photograph is the main example. In this shot we've got, I think this one's really nice, of you focus immediately on the cake in the kid's face because those are the brightest and most contrasty and most saturated parts of the image. They're just kind of, it's this interaction between the child and the cake. There are people back behind the kid, but you don't focus on them because that's not what the lighting is dictating that you look at. Because again, in films, oftentimes we don't have much time on a given shot. Sometimes some shots can be only a second long. I've seen shots that have been less than 10, some less than 10 frames long, only like 7 frames long that have been a quarter of a second on screen. And you need to, convey your story. You need to tell the viewer what to look at in that very short period of time. So they don't have time to wander around the image and find what they're looking for. This is a good one. I like this one because the knife she's holding in her right hand. The knife is definitely a focal point, not only because it's the brightest, but again, as you notice, the background gets very dark in that area, so it allows it to really pop off, and then the viewer just, your eye just kind of clings to that knife almost immediately. This kind of thing where, the darkness of the silhouetted character against the bright background, again, your eye kind of goes through the tunnel to that point and focuses on the characters as they run out. It's not always focusing on the face. Sometimes it's, in this shot from the Silent Dracula film, you get the focus right on the eyes. And again, this is pretty heavy-handed, but, you get the idea that sometimes you want to focus on a specific part of the character. Again, Mad Men does a great job of this. As you can see, each character, there's three faces that you want to pick out of this, and also the woman's back is the fourth main object as you go around, and you can see if you look at this picture and kind of data pick the brightness levels of the faces are always, the skin on the faces is always brighter than the skin on the rest of the body. The woman on the left, her face is the same skin as her arm, but it's definitely a shade brighter, and your eye immediately goes there. So another big thing about being a lighting artist, so again, those are the three main topics, but the one thing that you always want to do is you always, and we're going to beat this point to death throughout this workshop, I'm sure, is that you always want to look at reference. You want to reference color of light, you want to reference quality of light, you want to reference all of this stuff to understand what you're, to understand what mood you're setting, to understand what kind of visual shaping you're looking for. So, if you want to do a dusk morning scene with some artificial light, this is, look it up, see the way those green fluorescents are versus the blue of the sky versus the warm tungsten street lamps, and just see how those colors work together, and then you mimic that. If you want like a warm desert, like what does that look like lit? Like what is the shadow qualities? What are the light qualities? And everything that is involved in that. You can look at depth of field. We'll talk a lot about depth of field in this, and always understand that you need to be looking at reference for these kind of things. Looking at painting reference is always good, because again, a painter functions in a similar way to this as a CG lighter, where they have to, they're not constrained by physical limitations of light the way that a photographer or a cinematographer is. We can push and pull things a little further. But yeah, I would say always look for reference when you're setting up your lighting, and then go from there. So the next step is we're going to be opening up Maya, and I'm going to be showing you some CG lights a little bit, and showing you how to some of the tools that will be required to complete this look that we're going for. So that'll be the next step. Okay,